at this point in time? Slightly lower, the story on the Sensex.
It's actually very, very quiet. I think it's been a status quo budget, largely, you'd have to say, and that's something that the market has taken in its stride and has perhaps moved on now. If you look at it, the Nifty is very, very flat. The mid-cap index is under a bit of pressure, down about 400-odd points. And, we have Rahul Arora joining in here, CEO of Nirmal Bang Equities, so I do want to get him on board. But just for the people who've joined in late, the one thing that stands out as a big positive is the glide path to get the fiscal deficit below 4.5% by FY26. That will continue, and the government is firmly committed to that particular fiscal glide path. So that's the big positive. But apart from that, it seems to be largely a status quo budget, if you'd have to call it that. In fact, no rural SOPs, etc. The government has resisted the temptation to go populist in a pre-election budget, which is always a good thing. But Rahul is here with us. Rahul, your key takeaways, and from a stock angle, anything that stands out for you?
In a very tacit sort of way, this is kind of an election budget. I think if you look at Manrega going up from 60 to 86,000 crores, directly targeted at rural, so that will be a benefit, and I assume the rollouts will be very soon. And the interesting part is that 1 crore taxpayers that had disputes outstanding up to 25,000 rupees, they're gone, just like that. So somewhere tacitly they have, it is a very soft touch at an election budget, if you will. And she's given the market what they wanted to hear on the fisc, right? So she's gone with 11% on capex. She's spoken about 4.5% by FY26. She's ensured that the bond market will be stable. I think the yield should probably be hovering between 6.9 to 7.1% for the better part of the year. As this allows the RBI to cut rates, depending on what the Fed does. So I was just talking to my economist and I said, okay, what's the view now? So she thinks there is a good chance of a 50 basis point rate cut in the next fiscal. And I think the Fed may act in accordance as well. Maybe they'll take the first move. But I think she's given the market what they wanted to hear. She's tacitly hinted at an election. And I think she's kept the larger buzzwords of, green energy, EVs and so on and so forth also intact.
Homes.
Absolutely. 2 crore homes. And that will obviously benefit the affordable housing and anyone that's, doing affordable housing. So, I mean, of course, you'll have to see how asset qualities and margins move. But, people immediately may get, excited about the Avases and the Aptuses and the Home First and the LIC housing finances of the world. But just on this, can you assume that all of these guys will grow at 20% plus? I don't know. But net, as she said in Hindi, in the next budget, she will lay the foundation for a Viksit Bharat. It'll be very interesting to see how they begin that journey. Because I think, Sonia, just in conclusion, I'd like to say, if you look at the last 10 years of this government, right, it's been a lot about regulation through DMON, GST, RERA, IBC, NCLT, bankruptcy, all of that. Then, of course, as any head of state, he had to contend with COVID. But then after COVID, he spent a lot of time balancing external sector, our relationships in the world. He's made a lot of trips across the world to secure relationships, right? And then the Ram Temple has opened. So I think if you look at from a macro standpoint, what could the next 5 years entail? It has to be about development. So I think the next budget could probably land up being the biggest and the best budget of this government that they have had since inception, because everything that he was voted to do in power over the last 10 years has been done. And there's nothing else to do but focus on the economy right now. So the big call to, ask is, can the Nifty potentially be at 50,000 by the time you go into the next election in 5 years, which is about a 15-16% compounded number, maybe a little higher than that. My sense is he's going to lay the foundation of that in July.
All right. Okay. Well put, Rahul. And we'll come back to you in just a bit. But there are so many in with us. Rahul, I'm sure you've been in touch with your team as well. Anything they've picked up sectorally, bunch of stocks where there is an impact one way or the other, based on what we've heard?
No, I think it's going to be a lot PSU oriented is my sense. I think, of course, I'm sure you've discussed this 3 railway corridors as well and the impact, and we were discussing this in the morning as well. I think probably the best way to play any sort of infrastructure, Prashant, in India is cement. I think it's because of the cash flows. And I think those kind of cash flows can fund the capex themselves. I heard you talk about public sector banks. I think one of life's biggest mysteries for me is that SBI is an 18% ROE company, Bank of Baroda is a 16% ROE company, and they go at just 1.1. I'm not saying you need to give it an ICICI Bank kind of multiple, but do you need the discount to be so large? I mean, intuitively, if I reverse the question and ask you, is there one corporate that you can name today that's going to go bust in the next 1 year or 2 years? The situation is very different from where it was a decade back. Retail slippages thoda idhar-udhar ho jayega, by and large. Net interest margins maybe for a quarter or two. But logically, SBI and Bank of Baroda, according to me, should be at least 50% higher than where they are today. The entire PSU basket, whether it's railways, defense, across the board, have re-rated multiple times over. So I think that's probably something that one can look at. And lastly, I think because as Sonia was talking about affordable housing, I think the way to probably play it could potentially be through stocks like Kajaria. I think that's we like the tile segment, and I think there we do have an upside of almost 30-35% on that name. I think reasonable to assume a 14-15% kind of volume growth if these numbers are to come through. So I think probably that's one way to play home improvement in addition to the housing finance companies we spoke about. So I think those will probably be specific to this, but can these immediately react? I don't think so. It's just an announcement. It has to be implemented and then it will come into the numbers. But Prashant, I've always learned one thing after seeing cycles: focus on cash flows, focus on dividend yields, focus on growth. It'll stand you in good stead. I mean, your colleague was just talking about OMCs right now. I don't know how many people are aware. It's the only sector in India and probably one of the only sectors in the world where the free cash flow yield and the dividend yield is higher than the price to earnings multiple. Logically, the OMC should be multi-baggers from here theoretically, but obviously there's an overhang. But there's a lot to play. I mean, just because the Nifty is at 22,000 to say that, there's nothing to buy, I don't buy that.
Okay. By the way, the big story still remains what happened with Paytm, right? I mean, after that 20% circuit down. So I'm going to come to you in a bit. My colleague